The White Sox fans, Brett Ballantini here again on the Side Sox Podcast. It is Side Sox Podcast number 18. Big news, of course, yesterday breaking: Liam Hendriks signing with the White Sox. A move forecasted by, I don't know, guess who? If you're a White Sox fan, you do not need a Magic 8 ball. You do not need to throw I-Ching sticks. You don't need a D&D die. You just need to follow James Fox on Twitter because he's going to deliver the goods for you. A week ago, he pretty much broke the story. He said, Brett, we got to get this thing up sort of quick. Even though it was a Sunday night, you got to get it up sort of quick because something's happening. All right, it turned out to be a week delay, but Hendriks is a White Sox. James Fox joins us on the podcast here. James, you did it again.
I did. I was getting a little bit scared though. I was like, they're not going to. I was pretty confident they were going to get it done. Obviously I thought it was coming like within days of publishing. And I didn't really want to wait because they had already had the article written, but yeah, it is what it is. It took a while. I don't know exactly what happened, but it seems like typical agent shenanigans. I think Liam Hendriks wanted to be in Chicago pitching for the White Sox for a lot of reasons that we can get into. But you got to get that last bit of money, and he's never really been paid before. So, good for him. He just guaranteed himself $54 million.
Right. And to the White Sox credit, listen, they got a little pushback from the Hendriks camp, and they found a way to get it done. They clearly marked this guy as maybe even their top priority in this offseason, certainly among free agents. And they got it done. And so however you want to quibble with how it got done, or that crazy, weird, like, will he or won't he fourth-year option, which isn't really, quibble all you want, but they got their guy, and they got the best closer in the game.
Yeah, they did. And there's been some talk about that. And, we often talk about White Sox Twitter and how crazy it is at times. But, it's the best closer in baseball right now. The MLB Network did their shredder thing last night. And it was pretty funny because he was listed as it's almost like they knew he was signing. You almost wonder about some of that stuff because they did high leverage relievers or whatever yesterday, and Liam Hendriks is like, the best starter in baseball, and then an hour later he has an agreement in principle with the White Sox, and it's like all over the place. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, he's been really, really good, and I wrote some of that in the piece, and I put some some heat maps in there just to show you the transformation with this guy. He was he's been in the big leagues for a while, and he was kind of a underachieving starter that even considered going and pitching in Japan or Korea, and he bounced around. He was designated for assignment 4 times. And, with Oakland used him as an opener, I believe 2 years ago in the playoffs. And then all of a sudden, the stuff ticked way up, and he's throwing, high 90s, and he's using some of the, high 4-seamer and tunneling it, and he's just been stellar. He's been the best reliever in baseball. You don't like to pay for past performance, obviously, but I think they think he's got a few more years here. He's going to be 32, I think, when the season starts, but he doesn't have the arm of a 32-year-old because he doesn't have the innings load that most guys with that sort of success would have.
Yeah. James' story from last week, sort of anticipating this move, is linked below on this podcast post. But James, you sort of allude to the fact his age and the amount of wear on the arm, which isn't great, especially for his age. How much in your gut do you think he has to be that top, or let's just call near the top level closer of this contract for it to pay off for the Sox? Does he just need one great year? Does he need to duplicate 2019 next year, and that pretty much pays a contract? Do you need 2 years, 3 years? What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, so I probably need 2 to justify it, but the thing is, if the Sox win the World Series in 2021, nobody's going to care, right? So it's just kind of, I think, about that. And honestly, it's really not that much money, right? We think it's a lot of money because we follow the White Sox, and this is is this going to stop them from doing other stuff? It probably will, because that's the way that this team operates, right, on these arbitrary budgets. But it's $54 million. It's, I was joking with somebody earlier, because we could pick on Jerry Reinsdorf all we want to, but guess which owner in baseball is guaranteed the most money to a free agent this offseason so far? Jerry Reinsdorf, baby.
Hey, come on, Jerry.
$54 million. Nobody else has committed that kind of dough yet. So
The Sox were determined to get Hendriks. Obviously, they dug through in this past week when negotiations, there's maybe a little stalemate, or perhaps there were a couple teams being trotted out as competition that perhaps really weren't. To your way of thinking, I know maybe it made you slightly uneasy, but did you ever think there was anything real that the Sox were going to let Hendriks get away?
So I guess the only thing I thought was, like, I knew that they were apprehensive about a fourth year. And obviously,
Sure.
we've seen some of the gymnastics that they've played there with this fourth year option type thing. And obviously they were holding out for 4 years. I had heard the Sox really didn't want to go obviously, like for obvious reasons. So yeah, I thought it was possible that somebody desperate could just pop in and guarantee a fourth year to Liam Hendriks, and all of a sudden you lose him. But usually when it drags on like this, it's because an agent doesn't have the fourth year, right? Like if there was a fourth year, this guy's probably signed a long time ago. I mean, I think after the Eaton and Lance Lynn moves, I had spoken to, one of the more prominent White Sox beat writers. It's been around for a very long time. I'll let everybody else try to figure out who that is. Kind of thought that closer would be done, like that next week, like after Eaton, it's kind of like, I think something's going to move here. And then it just kind of didn't, So, that was a little bit of a surprise. But I did hear, like, reaching out, through some sources that know Liam Hendriks. Like he's big into this codify baseball, I think is what it's called. And it's like heat maps for like pitching success. And the White Sox are one of the teams like at the forefront of this, where they've like really used this stuff. And a lot of other organizations haven't. Yasmani Grandal is a big proponent of it, along with Lucas Giolito as well. I guess it's big, like Liam Hendriks attributes a lot of his like recent career success to it. And, the Sox are like on the cutting edge, whereas, the two teams that were rumored to be interested, Houston and I believe Toronto, like aren't really. And there were some other issues too. Like Liam Hendriks was very much like against the sign stealing scandal, and was very, talked a lot about that. And, was, so, I had talked to somebody that knows people in Houston that said like, even the people in Houston were like, yeah, they didn't think he was coming because of that. Like he just like couldn't let it go. And then the big animal lover, I guess, that Liam Hendriks is, one of the reasons he was drawn to Tony La Russa is the animal like rescue charity that Tony La Russa runs. There's no pit bulls allowed in the city of Toronto, which is just another like weird quirk, right? Like, look, I think Liam Hendriks is in Chicago or signing with Chicago because of $54 million. Like I think money talks, right? But there were some other like factors like making him want to come here in the first place.
James, how crazy is it? Okay, the White Sox have spent the most in free agents. They're cutting edge. We're talking about the White Sox, right? I'm interviewing you about the White Sox. I consider you our White Sox insider. This is the White Sox we're talking about, right?
Yeah. I don't think George Springer or Trevor Bauer's coming next, so we don't have to get that carried away.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But for now, in this moment, exactly.
Well, that's why it is weird, right? Like there's a whole big segment of the fan base, obviously, that's still, not too happy about Tony La Russa, right? And then you sign Adam Eaton, you cheaped out in right field, and there are a lot of people that I feel like are like just like upset, I guess, about the general direction of the team, and I think they might have the best roster in the American League.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can have, yeah, there's some issues, right? Yeah. And like, you can think that the front office like doesn't know what they're doing, and the owner's cheap, and like, but they might have the best roster in the American League right now. Yeah. So it's kind of, they've done some stuff right. I mean, this is a really good baseball team, and I'm sure we're going to get into it a little bit. Like, I don't think they're done. So, it's pretty interesting. I'm gonna like, is spending $50 million on a closer the best use of resources? Maybe not, but at least they got the best guy in the sport, right? Like if you're going to do it, do it.
And otherwise we'd be complaining about that $50 million being kept in somebody's pocket, So, I mean, there's spending. There's nothing wrong with fans wanting the most perfect 26-man fit on the roster. Of course, we want to push the team for that. We got to hold their feet to the fire. And when they take a step back, maybe with a managerial choice or your choice for right field, of course, it's fair to fire on them. But at the same time, you do have to give credit when the money is spent, and you have to get credit for what the situation is. I mean, Jeff Passan, I think, just wrote an article that said, hey, White Sox are the best team in the American League. It's not necessarily for what they've done. It's for what the other teams haven't done. And that counts. I mean, we can just focus on the White Sox and say, hey, they haven't done this yet. They haven't done that yet. Hey, why'd they spend so much? And that's all fine. You can have the criticism, but contextually, you got to look around and say, okay, well, Cleveland just bowed out of the race. Minnesota's done nothing. Other teams have lost key pieces, and the White Sox may, whether it's backing into it or not, it doesn't matter. You back into the World Series, you're in the World Series, James.
Right. Like, are they going to be the biggest spender in the American League, like, at the end of the offseason? I'd say probably not.
Right.
You know, because somebody's signing George Springer to a lot of money at some point, right? But, I mean, I think they're going to probably fill all their needs, and hopefully they do so without trading prospects, and then you have prospects that you can trade at the deadline if anything goes, you know, kind of the way that you didn't anticipate it was going to go. I mean, look, everybody wants, like, the best team possible, and I think, like, people look at the San Diego Padres and freak out because they have players that, you know, we either could have had or had once, right? And people get mad, but, like, look, that's the second place team probably in the National League West. So, you know, like, we don't have to worry about the San Diego Padres, like, until we get to the World Series, unless, like, they're moving to our division somehow and nobody told me. So while you want the best team possible, you want to win whatever, a title, multiple titles. I've always been under, you know, I've always thought the best way to do that is to win your division all the time. If you win your division every year, you get a shot at the tournament every year. That, you know what I mean? Like, you don't build a team to win the World Series. You build a team to win the regular season, and then you hope everything goes right once you get into the tournament.
Right. So we weren't complaining last year when it was a surprise. Oh, the playoffs were they were expanded. Well, okay, they got a playoff spot. They wouldn't have made the playoffs if it was a normal year. Okay, well, it's not a normal year. It's this year. So you do have to just sort of take what you're dealt, and you know, this is a first step. As Ricky Renner, he always preach, hey, it was important to get these guys the experience. Hey, they got the experience. That gives them a foot forward coming into 2021 now that they're apparently maybe the favorites in the American League, you know. So we can't complain. It is easy to nitpick, and I don't think it's unique to White Sox Twitter, White Sox fan base. You know, we want to nitpick our team. We want our team to be as good as possible. And, you know, it's good that they're under the microscope. Whether or not they listen, whether or not they respond, you know, it's not an exercise in complete futility unless, of course, you're spending today grousing about Liam Hendriks, because it's just not a situation to grouse about. And thank God, I tend to always see new deals and feel the negative first. I talk to guys like you, or I see some other comments. I see comments even on Southside Sox, and it always evens me out a little bit, because I realize, you know, there's more angles to look at, ones I haven't necessarily considered. And, you know, it always sort of evens me out a little bit. So thank you, James. You've helped.
Oh, yeah.
You've kept me cool today.
Well, look, there's some stuff that, you know, really grinds my gears, obviously, but I'm not gonna. I mean, after the White Sox signed Liam Hendriks, you know, my talking point isn't, you know, they should have spent the money on Michael Brantley instead. You know, it's just kind of not where my brain goes. Right. So
we're going to jump in a second. We're going to jump to maybe what still needs to be done. You've alluded to the fact that you don't think that they're finished, but let's just take 1 second and just have a little philosophical discussion. Closers play a limited role. They're very specialists. Obviously, their appearances are very high leverage. Even in a massive season like Hendriks' 2019, he faced about 5% of Oakland's batters, opposition batters. You know, he's taken about 4% of the roster space on a 26-man roster. And of course, closers are always paid far more than that. Are you a guy who subscribes, I suppose, maybe to the La Russa thinking of, you know, the closer being so significant? Ricky Renteria did this as well, and I think most managers do. Do we overvalue the importance of closers, or is it important to have that guy come in to say, just for peace of mind, this weird, like, mental thing, clubhouse thing that doesn't necessarily translate to on the field, important to have a guy for your ninth inning, for your eighth and ninth inning? Or is that maybe overblown?
I just like having a bunch of good arms, and I think that's what they have. So that's why I kind of like Hendriks in particular, right? Is because I think and not that Tony will necessarily do this, but, you know, if your best three hitters are in the seventh and he's got to come in and, you know, get three guys out in the seventh, he can. And you might have Crochet in your bullpen, or Bummer, or a guy that could close later. So, yeah, I think having high leverage relievers is valuable. I would prefer my team develop their own and then trade them and then develop more, because, you know, there's nothing better than developing a relief pitcher and trading him for 6 years of a position player, and then, you know, you just get another one, you know, that. So right. I understand, like, spending on closer isn't the best use of resources, obviously, and we saw the White Sox do it with David Robertson. I'm glad that, like, if they're gonna do, or if, you know, they're doing it, I'm glad it's for the best guy and it's for this guy. Now, I think with a guy like Alex Colomé, Like Alex Colomé pretty much can pitch the ninth. And that's it. Like he's not really, you're not going to bring him in the eighth. You're not going to bring him in a non-save situation because, it's just like you're sitting there feeling not so great when he's like on the mound, like going to get in a tie game.
And he didn't respond to that very well either.
No, where I think Hendriks, I don't know if it's because he wasn't like conditioned and brought up as a closer. Like maybe he doesn't really care. Like he's just kind of coming in to, shove it up the other team's butt. Like, wherever he's throwing. So, I guess I agree with both sides of it, right? Like, do I think set closer is necessary? No, but I think the way the league is going, like you need a freaking stud bullpen with a bunch of like different options because starters just aren't going as deep anymore.
James Fox always doing work for the White Sox. I think he's just stumbled upon the possible 2021 slogan, shove it up the other team's butt. Mm-hmm. And listen, I agree with you. If you're gonna buy high, never great at any position, and certainly not when it comes to the short arms and the relievers. But if you are gonna buy high, you at least buy the best, buy the Cadillac, and that's what they did with Hendriks. So you can only quibble so much. In fact, you probably shouldn't quibble at all, but you can only quibble so much. Now, contingent on all of this, for us to be even happier, is perhaps if a couple more holes are filled or if there's a little bit more activity still to come for the White Sox. You seem very confident that there is. So let's talk a little bit about that. I believe maybe let's just kick off with the possibility of a Lucas Giolito extension to make sure he's here. Maybe it's buying out some arbitration and so forth, but something that might keep him here and give us a good feeling about our ace.
Yeah, so Lucas Giolito's first year arbitration eligible, I believe. He should get somewhere in the $5 to $8 million range. That deadline for, I guess, exchanging is Friday. Now, that's not when, if they decide to go to arbitration, that's like not when the actual hearing is. Right. They need a deal by Friday. Otherwise, they go to arbitration. And apparently the White Sox and his camp are talking. They've talked in the past. It was not that he was like opposed to an extension. He was just fine going year to year, and he trusts himself. And, if you know anything about Lucas Giolito, he comes from a family, that has money. And I just don't think, it's something that he really cared about. Now, I do think Ethan Katz being in the organization, like maybe that sways him a little bit. I think he's a little bit, it's a tough guy to extend because it's not a guy coming from Latin America or Cuba, with an agent that, is looking to get their 3 to 5% like off that deal too. Right. So yeah, I think this is, this one, if it happens, will look pretty fair. It's not going to look like some of the other ones where you're like, oh man, that looks like a serious underpay. So, if you're looking at buying out 3 years of arbitration, you're probably like 5 to 8 million this year. You're probably up around the 10 to 12 million range and then maybe 15, right? So if you're talking 30, 35 million over the first 3 and then options with, maybe it's like a 5-year deal in the 70 to 80 range with some sort of like built-in recon options at the end of it too. I think something like that's fair. If he signs a 1-year deal by Friday, the extension talks probably, the extension's probably not happening. Right. But I think we could hear, I guess I would just say that like if Lucas Giolito is extended before Friday, I'm not going to be surprised because it is one of the offseason priorities, along with I think another possible a little mini extension for Lance Lynn as well. That was part of looking to get him.
Yeah, one of the things the White Sox are doing, which all great organizations are going to do, or all successful organizations are going to do, is identifying the guys that are valuable enough to you to commit to at a young enough age and commit to those guys. And hopefully you have players willing to buy in on the team and they're not already disgruntled and want to get away. And we've seen that obviously with Eloy Jimenez and Luis Robert, Moncada, Lucas Giolito clearly falls a little bit outside of that, but he fits in basically with the, numbers wise, he fits in with those guys. And obviously he plays probably even a more prominent leadership role than any of them. So he'd be a really great guy to have in the back pocket for a number of years coming. So we don't necessarily have to do this year-to-year thing with Giolito and arbitration. Now, there's probably a need for another rotation arm, probably a need at least for some form of bat. Probably not going to be a big wampum bat like maybe we dreamed of back in October or November. But do you think both are likely to get done, one more likely than the other, or will there be a significant piece added, meaning a guy who doesn't just automatically slot into the number 4 in the rotation, or a bat that's sort of a DH kind of bat? Anything significant, or just probably some filler pieces that La Russa has his eye on?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if it is significant, it'll probably be a trade. And I don't know. I just like don't think that, like they've talked about Sonny Gray in Cincinnati. You've heard Joe Musgrove in Pittsburgh. I think they've talked to the Brewers for like a year about Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff. But those guys are going to cost something pretty significant. Like I've heard Cody Hoyer's name mentioned in deals going back, but it's not just going to be for Cody Hoyer. I mean, you're talking Nick Madrigal possibly on the table, Jonathan Stever. So those would be the names. I think they just sign another starter, probably short term. I think the issue with that, though, is the Drew Smyly contract in Atlanta, I think, threw the market for a loop. I mean, you got a 1-year, $11 million deal for Drew Smyly. So if you think you're signing a Garrett Richards or a Jose Quintana for less than that, you probably got another thing coming. So, yeah, I mean, so I think that leads you to explore, like, hey, could we trade a couple of prospects for somebody cheaper that's just as good? Maybe, But I think they'll end up, Garrett Richards, even maybe like Adam Wainwright for a year, something along. I mean, there's a lot of guys on the market. Yeah. And I do think in an ideal world for them, by July, Cease and Kopech are both in the rotation. I just think you can't plan on that from the start. And I think Reynaldo Lopez is probably moving to a bullpen role if he's on the team. So as far as the other thing, I don't think a big like designated hitter, like big bat is coming by any, I don't think, at all. It's just, I don't think they want to tie up the DH spot. I think Andrew Vaughn is going to play a big part this year. I don't think from the beginning, but I mean, if he's going to play 125 games,
it's going to be a lot.
Then you're not signing Marcell Ozuna like to block him, right? So, I think a guy they'd love is Tommy La Stella. He's a guy that La Russa is very familiar with from Anaheim. I think Tommy still lives here, but you would think there would be more opportunity for him elsewhere. But I mean, he is probably a platoon guy at this stage, a really good one. 151 weighted runs created plus against right-handed pitching last year. So, I mean, Tommy La Stella is a guy that fits really, really well as a guy where if you want to leave Andrew Vaughn in the minors, I mean, La Stella could play every day against righties, and you could just mix and match that DH spot nicely. So if it's not him, maybe a Cesar Hernandez or like a Brad Miller type. I do think a versatile left-handed hitting infielder makes more sense than another outfielder. But who knows? I think they'll add a versatile left-handed bat of some sort. It won't be a huge deal by any means. And then another starter. And then I think we've talked about it before, maybe very cheap backup catcher on the horizon at some point. I mean, look, they may be in a spot here where they can just wait and let the market come to them, because Major League Baseball seems set on starting spring training on time, because they really, that's a whole other podcast, obviously, but the owners really have no leg to stand on, and the MLBPA wants 162 games of pay. So as of now, everything's starting on time, and you got a ton of free agents left to sign in a month.
There's a lot of guys without jobs. As much as we can say Drew Smyly's throwing everything off, well, there's a bunch of guys still waiting, not knowing where they're going to be having their commissary meals this year. So clearly there may be something in between there, because there's just a lot of.
Well, and I think we heard about the spring training thing yesterday, because I think right now they're negotiating the health and safety protocols, the DH, which is probably going to be in both leagues. And the expanded playoffs. I mean, look, they expanded the playoffs last year. I don't think they're ever going away. I don't think it's going to be 8 teams. That was excessive.
Haven't they sold that round to ESPN, even though it doesn't exist yet?
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of out there.
Yeah, I think it's happening, right. So I think it's more likely to be 7 teams instead of 8, and maybe 6 long term prior to expansion. But yeah, man, like that stuff. Generally, when leagues add more playoff teams, they don't take them away.
Yeah, you don't pull it back. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And yeah, just like team leagues don't really contract. Yeah, you don't really pull that stuff back in.
Well, and right now, all these leagues, like I understand, like as a fan, you don't want watered down sports leagues, but expansion makes sense in all these leagues right now because the expansion fees are over $1 billion per club in every sport. I mean, that's, I know like neither one of us feels sorry for the owners, but it can make a difference in paying back some of their money. You add two, the NBA is talking adding two teams. Baseball's probably going to add two at some point here. Yeah. So, that makes sense at this point.
Well, in terms of the pool of players, in each of these sports, or certainly in baseball's case, it's more international than ever. So, the pool does increase too, NBA, we've seen that. So, it's not as if we're just going to be pulling AA players up into the majors to pitch.
Well, and in baseball, it seems like all you need to do is try, and you can win.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Hey, we're trying this year, James. This is awesome.
Yeah, that's what somebody was talking about the White Sox like earlier, and I like laughed, and then I had to pinch myself, and I was like, oh, gee. One of the national guys was like, oh, the San Diego Padres and the White Sox have distinguished themselves by trying. Yeah. Like they're trying to get better. While the rest of the sport waits.
You'd think it'd be easy, but it is a little complicated. But the White Sox are on the right side of that curve, and you've been there reporting it for us and throwing great stuff out there on Twitter. So again, listeners and readers, just check out the Twitter feed, check out the articles on Southside Sox, and of course on Future Sox if you're going to dip into the minor league realm, because James always got good stuff. He's got great context. That's why I like to call him our White Sox Insider. He does a job for us, and he essentially broke the Liam Hendriks story for us last week, but now it's reality this week. And thank you for hopping on for this emergency Liam Hendriks podcast. I know you got a lot of other commitments here today and other people to talk to as we celebrate having a legit top-of-the-line closer with the Chicago White Sox. So thanks for hopping on the Side Sox podcast, James, and let's talk again real soon.
Sounds good, Brett. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, James.